Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges, and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Victoria Pritchard, founder of Redvoice. So, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing how we can all improve our public speaking skills and make our voices shine. And just before we get into that, let's start with a quick question to open up our conversation, Victoria, and that whose voice would you choose to record your own autobiography audiobook? And you can't do it yourself.
No, 100% Helen Mirren.
Oh,
100%.
wow, straight in.
Yeah, absolutely. She's got the most fantastic voice and she's got a flexibility and a warmth to her voice. It's just so adaptable and so fabulous. I can't think of another word for sure. Helen Mirren.
Fantastic. Well, that's absolutely amazing. I think that's the most rapid response I've had to these questions. And I was thinking about this myself, and I think I'd go with Stephen Tompkinson. You know, he's from Stockton-on-Tees. It's close by where I was born, and I also love DCI Bank. So, yeah, I'd go Stephen Tompkinson. That a bit of northern drawl as well in there. Well,
Love it.
okay, so moving on to our conversation topic, Victoria, could you just give us a bit of background for our listeners on yourself and what inspired you to become a voice and public speaking coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sort of very lucky really because I have two jobs. So I spend half my life as a professional actor, a professional presenter and a theatre director, and I spend the other half of my life running Red Voice and traveling well all over the world actually helping people to what I like to call communicate confidently. So my background is classical theatre, and I trained at a very famous drama school called the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, which is a fabulously dramatic name, better known as LAMDA. Actually, the oldest theatre school in Britain. A lot of people think it's RADA, but it isn't. It's actually LAMDA. And I was very lucky to leave with an agent, which is the sort of holy grail as a young actor. And I worked in theatres all over the world. So I worked all over Europe. I worked all over the UK. I was lucky enough to take a show to Broadway. I was lucky enough to take a show to Tokyo. And I ended up with the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford upon Avon, which is a fabulous organisation to work for. And I did a lot of performances of the same two Shakespeare plays. So Much Ado About Nothing and Merry Wives of Windsor. For 2 years, I was with the company. And at the end of it, I phoned my agent and said, get me a job on television. I never want to go on stage again. Not that I didn't love it, but when you've done 8 shows a week for 2 years, you actually just want a Saturday night to be able to, go out with friends or a Saturday afternoon to go to someone's wedding. So I was very lucky. I got a part in a series called Bad Girls, which is set in a women's prison. And then I spent a couple of years on Holby City playing the paediatrician, Dr. Charles. Went on to do lots of dramas, lots of commercials. Did a stint on EastEnders, did a stint in Emmerdale. For My Sins, did a bit of a time on Hollyoaks and then ended up kind of coming back to my first love theatre about 10 years ago, but as a director, which is kind of what I'd always wanted to do. So I now work predominantly as a director and also as a professional presenter myself. And I got into doing the voice coaching really when I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company. So it was the mid 90s. So I hate to say it, but it's nearly 30 years ago.
Wow.
And which I'm sure can't be right, but nearly 30 years ago. And one of the amazing things about working for an organisation like the Royal Shakespeare Company is that you get approached to collaborate on lots of projects because it's such a famous institution. And we were approached to do some presentation skills training with investment banks in the city of London. So JP Morgan, Schroders, Merrill Lynch, Deutsche Bank, the big investment banks. And it was working with the BBC Training and Development Centre. And the head of voice at the Royal Shakespeare came to me and said, would you be interested in doing this project? I'd never been in an office in my life. I was 27 or something, and I'd never set foot. I knew nothing about the corporate world, but I thought actually this could be quite interesting. So I got involved with working with the BBC Training and Development, just doing odd days here and there, and I was really, really struck by a couple of things. First of all, how little training these people had had previously, and they were having, we were working with research analysts, so these analysts had to present every morning to the traders, and they were generally quite quiet, quite introvert types, very, very brilliant mathematicians and statisticians, but they had to present every morning to the traders, and they were absolutely terrified, which was why, of course, we were being brought in, because they were also pretty ineffective. And the other thing that really struck me was actually there was quite a lot of crossover between the world that these guys worked in and the world that I inhabited as a young actor and presenter myself. And I came away from that and I thought, actually, I'd like to create something that could help them and make them understand these skills in the way that we understand them as actors and performers. And I also am a professional presenter myself. So I, host conferences, I host award ceremonies. So I feel people's pain. I absolutely know what it feels like. And I don't mean intellectually, no, I mean physically, kind of in your body and in all your thoughts and anxieties. I completely understand that. And as performers, as professional performers, we have techniques that I know work, and I know they work because I use them myself every day. So that really my kind of drive into the world of presentation skills and media training came from a kind of a need to help these people and wanting to make their life easier in a way that I knew I could, because I had those skills myself as a performer.
Oh, thank you. And so, if we're looking at that, what are some of the main reasons that people seek out your services, your coaching services?
What events do you mean, or for them personally?
I suppose for them personally, in a way, you mentioned that obviously, working with BBC Training and Development, that some of these guys were absolutely terrified of going, and that's probably one, being terrified, standing up and presenting in person, whether it's in a room for 10 people or whether it's on stage for 10,000 people.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, Craig, because I've been delivering training either one-to-one or small group sessions, as I say, for nearly 30 years, and I always send a questionnaire out to people before I work with them, and I would say without a shadow of a doubt 97% of those questionnaires come back with nerves as being an issue. Anxiety, nerves, lack of confidence. People use that word confidence all the time. They want to be more confident, or they used to be confident, or so I think without a doubt nerves and anxiety is probably the biggest reason. And it's very interesting because people don't always package it like that, but actually when you peel it back, that is what really sits at the heart of the struggles that most people have. Somewhere is self-doubt or lack of self-confidence, or just general nerves.
I think I can't remember the exact statistic, but I think there was people were more frightened of public speaking than actually of dying or something, and it's that bad.
I've heard that, absolutely. People fear public speaking more than death, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating for me because I work with all different types of organizations, and I work with all different levels. So from very, very senior leaders in global organizations to young graduates just starting out in their first job. And actually, everyone struggles with the same thing. Everyone has the same stuff that goes on for them, you know. So I think as human beings, and I think certainly culturally in this country, we're not great at dealing with nerves. We're not great, you know, we see them as being something very negative, and we see it, you know, we think if we stand up there and we look nervous that people are going to think we're not very well prepared or we're really rubbish at
Hmm.
our job. And I'm on a bit of I guess a bit of a one woman vigilante mission, really, to kind of change the way that we feel about nerves, and actually to start embracing them, because it's so interesting that people say to me, it's all right for you, you don't get nervous, you do it for a job. I hear that a lot. And I say, you know, the day I don't get nervous is the day I stop doing it for a job. The difference is that nerves are my best friend. And for most people, they're their worst enemy, you know. So I think it's a lot of it is about changing the mindset that we have and approaching those nerves in a different way. And also having some skills and some techniques, which is what I cover in my sessions with people, that they can apply to help make those nerves a little less painful. I won't say a little nicer, because I don't think nerves are nice for many people, but yeah.
No, I kind of agree with you then. And going back to what you said earlier about communicating confidently, I think that's a great way to lay that foundation, because like you say, nerves are your best friend, and I can't imagine many people who were not nervous before they're going to step out either onto stage or in front of a board, or even just in front of their own team in an office environment. But if you don't have those nerves, my feeling is that perhaps you'll be a little overconfident and come across as that, and maybe a little arrogant, and that's a balance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I also think if you don't have those nerves, my question would be, how much do you care?
Good
You
point.
know, we
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have nerves because we're invested in what we're talking about. And I think
Mm.
when people see that as being actually, I'm nervous because I want this to go well, because I care. But I also think the other thing that's really interesting about nerves is, it's a basic human response. It's adrenaline. It's a physiological thing that's happening. And adrenaline is our fight and flight hormone. And it's funny because I have a horse and I compete at reasonably low level, but dressage riding. And I'm much more nervous going out in front of one dressage judge on my horse than I am going out on stage in front of 1,000 people. And my partner thinks it's hysterical. He says, "How can you be nervous when you do this for a job?" Well, obviously, I'm riding 600 kilos of unpredictable animal for a start, so that I'm not totally in control. But also, the other big difference is miles on the clock. I haven't done as much competition riding as I have presenting.
Mm.
But what's really fascinating, and the reason I mention my horse in that, is because the moment I get on him and start warming up before going in to ride my test, I'm completely fine, because the adrenaline is being put to the purpose it's intended, which is to fuel our muscles. It's there where it we produce adrenaline to run away from the woolly mammoth or fight the woolly mammoth. That's where that comes from. And as soon as I'm using that adrenaline for the purpose it's intended, and contrary to what everybody thinks, dressage riding is actually really hard work. We don't just sit there. I'm completely fine. And I think one thing that presenters don't acknowledge is it's a very counterintuitive situation that they're in, because when we present, we have to stand still and speak. And the hormone in our body is going, run, run, fight, danger. So, so of course we're going to have an unpleasant sensation with that. And I think when I work with people, the first thing I say is, accept that. There's what you're experiencing is not wrong. It's an absolutely basic fundamental human response to the hormone that your body is producing. And I think sometimes when we start to see nerves differently, then actually we stop giving ourselves such a hard time.
And at the user group, we've worked with you and your organisation for several years now, and we put numerous members through the training. The feedback's always been absolutely exceptional. Everybody that goes on there comes out with feeling more confident, but also so happy that they took the time, the day to do it, because they feel so much better in themselves, and we get brilliant feedback from it. And so bringing people in, I'm sure, like you say, the majority have this issue with nerves. And are you able to kind of work with individuals assessing their specific needs within the groups to set their goals and help them? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, that's so lovely to hear, Craig. Thank you. I mean, I love working with your guys, and we always have a really great day. So it's lovely to hear that about the feedback. Yeah, and my commitment 100% is to work with individuals as much as possible during the day. What's interesting about this work is it's about muscle memory. We all have a way of communicating, and we all have things that we do when we're put under pressure, and we have a kind of default go-to position. And actually, if we want to improve and change that, we need to understand that, or I, as the trainer in the room, need to understand that everyone's default position is different, and how can we adapt what people are doing, because 80% of what people do is very effective. It's the 20% that gets in the way that we want to work with. And so I use cameras in the session and film people and let them see themselves and feedback on them, and try and work as much as possible with each individual in the room. That's why sometimes people say to me, "Oh, will you come and deliver a session to 100 people?" And I think, yes, I will, but I don't find, then it just becomes theory and words, and actually this work is not about theory, it's about doing. And so the sessions that I run are very experiential, they're very interactive, people are on their feet, we do games, we do exercises, getting people to really understand how to use the voice well, how to use the body well, and most importantly, what are they doing to get in the way of being as effective and impactful as possible.
Thank you. And back to that confidence element, and I suppose an individual's level of self-confidence also affects them, either going into that or before they step out onto the stage or in front of people.
Do you know, if I had £1 for every time I hear the word confidence, I would have a very, very nice villa in the south of France right now. I mean, I hear this word all the time, and I've had a very interesting, I've got a fascination with this concept of confidence, because I guess my first question to people is always, what is it? What is confidence? Because when I ask people that question, they go, well, it's and people can't answer that question, or they might say, oh, it's about really knowing your material, or it's about it's about getting up there and being in control. And I think what's fascinating about confidence for me, first of all, I don't know if there is an answer to that question. What is it? Personally, I'm not sure there is an answer. I think what's fascinating is we all know confidence when we see it, and we all know it when we feel it. We definitely know it when we don't see it and when we don't feel it, right? But it's actually really hard to quantify what it actually is. And I personally believe that's because it's different for all of us. And my confident and your confident and anybody else's, that it's not a one size fits all, but I do think it's about one thing more than over and above everything else. And that is authenticity, being authentic. And in fact, I always say in my training sessions, it's not about being confident. It's about being yourself confidently. And I think there's there's an obvious difference between those two statements. You know, confidence is something we stick on. Oh, stand like this, do this with your hands, you know, then you'll look confident. Actually, confidence is about something that comes from within us. And going right back to, you know, the research analysts that I started working with in the 90s, I think what's very interesting is that there are different types of presenters. We have what we call dynamic and what we call magnetic presenters. So dynamic presenters are people like myself who tend to push out in their communication style, and magnetic presenters work by drawing the listener in to them. So, you know, when you think of Barack Obama, or you think of David Attenborough, or anybody that watches Grand Designs, Kevin MacLeod, who hosts Grand Designs, you know, those kind of presenters are magnetic, and they work by drawing the listener in. And magnetic people tend to be more introverted. I say quieter, but I don't necessarily mean audibly quieter. I just mean gentler and stiller and softer in their delivery. And I work a lot with those kind of people, and they come into my sessions thinking, I know they're dreading it because they think they're going to have to be dynamic. You know, they're going to have to be all da-da, you know, and bells and whistles. And actually, I say to them, no, it's about being the most confident version of yourself, because wherever you sit on the dynamic magnetic spectrum, both are equally as good, you know. So, so I think this word confidence is really interesting, because I think it's about authenticity. Also, if we look at the origins of the word, it comes from the Latin, well, confidere, the verb, and confides, the noun. And con in Latin means with, but in this context, it's what we call an intensive prefix. So it means completely. The con means completely. And the fidere means to trust. And fides, the noun, means faith. So somewhere within what is confidence is it's about completely trusting and having complete faith. Now, whether that's in ourselves, or whether it's about an audience trusting and having faith in what we're talking about, I think it's all wrapped up in the same bundle. But it's definitely something about trusting yourself and allowing yourself to be yourself and be authentic.
Thank you. That's incredibly insightful. Thank you. And you know, I kind of get from that trust and faith in yourself, but also trust and faith in the audience is not going to kill you or anything. It's not like we're being thrown into the Colosseum with a bunch of lions.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
We know our community, but we don't know yours yet. Why not share the benefits of your UK&I SUG membership with those who don't know about us? The UK&I SUG referral scheme rewards you for helping to grow and develop our community. You can check out the link in the description to find out more about how you can get involved. Terms and conditions apply. We hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
We've talked about a couple of different areas and different kind of environments people get in, and you know, does the way you coach and work with people differ depending upon their profession, perhaps? You've already mentioned the dynamic and the magnetic, the different kinds of people, I suppose. But what about professions? Does that have an effect?
In all honesty, probably not. I mean, I think every course that I do is bespoke, really. So it's designed around the needs of either the individual, if I'm working with a one-to-one, or with the group. Obviously, the more senior global people that I work with, it tends to be more intensive one-to-one sessions. And, you know, I think really it doesn't matter whether you're, a trainee teacher just starting out, or some young software developer, you know, new, fresh out of university or something, or, or a global leader of a business. Actually, it's the same issues that people have, as I said, and the same muscle memory that people experience. and people want the same end result, which is the really, which is the great thing to see. So I think in truth, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, the sessions that I do for you, we have a whole array of sectors in the room. And that's one of the things I love about working with the user group is it can be we can have from 20-year-olds to 65-year-olds, from lower level to senior level, from all different sectors. And it's lovely that actually there's a real homogeny in the room, because everyone is wanting to achieve the same thing and everyone is focused on the same goal, so yeah.
And what I like about it as well from being in those sessions is everybody wants to help everybody else as well. It's about, if you like, myself becoming more confident and communicating confidently, as you say, but also how can I help others within the room to get the most from themselves too. And I like that camaraderie, that community feel.
And also, I think it's great for people to realise that they're not the only person struggling with this. Because I think we chastise ourselves and beat ourselves up so much for, being weak because we feel so nervous and anxious, or, we feel like we're boring people, or we're not very impactful. And actually, when they hear 10 other people in the room say exactly the same thing, you can feel this sort of collective sigh of relief, and people think, oh, actually, it's okay to feel like this. And I think it's been said before that somebody said once about 10 years ago that a day's training session with me, they got more than years of therapy. And I think in a way there is some element of truth in that, is that actually people carry around a lot of this anxiety and worry and stress about public speaking, or whether it's keynote speaking or just presenting to their colleagues or to clients. And actually it's a real relief for people to be able to get in a room and talk about that and realize that everybody else feels exactly the same way,
Oh, fantastic. And so looking at different circumstances, is there a different approach you take if, say, you're delivering a sales pitch to an organisation, or you're about to step on stage with 1,000 people looking at you? Or is it just simply back to that, be your authentic self?
Yeah, I think that sits at the heart of all of it, that actually, from the point of view of actually how we deliver and how we use the voice and the body well, the needs are the same. But obviously there might be some obvious differences, like time constraints. I mean, or you may have time constraints in both of those situations, and it's really important that we prepare in a way that we're not rushing to get through everything that we need to say. I think what's interesting, and one of the things I bring up with people in my sessions, is a few key questions to ask before we start. And one of them is, what's my environment? So where am I? Where am I doing this? Because it's all well and good preparing a presentation or a keynote in your desk, sitting at your laptop, looking at some PowerPoint slides. But actually, the environment that's around us is so important when it comes to how we communicate effectively. And I guess a keynote would tend to be in a bigger space. It would tend to be a bigger audience, a larger space, so that even if people are mic'd, which they almost certainly are nowadays, actually it's about understanding how to work within that space. Whereas a sales pitch might be a smaller, more intimate group of people, or a client presentation. It might also be remote. Obviously, that's not going anywhere. We're doing a lot of presenting online. So I think understanding our environment is a key difference. And also, I think the idea of how we present with other people. So very often in a sales pitch, for the pitches that I work on with organizations, there tends to be 3 or 4 people in that pitch. A keynote tends to be just one person in isolation. And I think there are things like, for example, how we hand over from one speaker to another in a pitch situation that people never really give the time and attention to. you have four people pitching, and all four of them prepare their own presentation, and they all check each other's slides and make sure that they're happy that everything's covered. But what they don't actually do is look at, okay, how am I going to hand over to you? How do we run this relay race without dropping the baton? Because that's what you're doing if you're presenting with more than one person. Whereas a keynote, I think you're up there on your own, you're standing up there, you're perhaps feeling a little bit more vulnerable. So I think environmental and external factors are probably the key difference. From a delivery point of view, I think it's very much the same.
Okay. And so we're kind of mid-pitch or mid-presentation, and the audience looks bored, stiff, and perhaps not engaging in the way we would like them to. Is there any tips you can give people to try and re-engage or engage with the audience?
So, I talked about that villa in the south of France that I would buy for every pound. If I had a pound for every time I hear the word engaging, I would get the swimming pool to go with my villa in France. So this word engaging, again, people come to me all the time and say, I spoke at a conference and the audience weren't very engaged, or I spoke on a Teams call and the audience weren't engaged, or I presented at work. And unfortunately, my response is always the same, which is I say, I think you'll find you spoke at a conference and you weren't very engaging. Because the thing about engagement that people fail to understand is it starts with us. It's what we call the action and reaction process. So what we put out to an audience, they will give us back. And I'm always fascinated that people see engagement as being this kind of holy grail that's, audiences are this kind of unpredictable thing. And, are they going to be an engaged audience, or are they not going to be an engaged audience? And it's almost as though we don't, we're going to roll the dice and see what kind of audience we have. And what people don't understand is it's absolutely 100% about how you communicate with them. Audiences are generally very, very generous. No one goes into a keynote speech going, I can't wait to be bored for the next hour. Everyone goes in there with the hopes that they're going to be engaged, that somebody engaging is going to get up on that stage. Audiences also, unfortunately, will always take the path of least resistance. So they will do whatever is easiest. And if it is easiest for them to disengage because you're droning on in a monotone and have been for 40 minutes, they will very, very quickly do that. But, I always say to people that it's impossible not to engage with someone who's engaging. So if your audience aren't engaged, there's only one question, which is how engaging am I being? And to kind of answer your question, how do you re-engage? I think that's very, very hard. In my experience, it's much more common that people fail to get engagement right from the get-go. It just takes maybe 10 minutes before the audience are honest enough to let them know that they're bored. But actually, how to engage them right from the start is a really, really key point, I think. Which maybe begs the question, how do we engage people? And, what is engagement? And I think it's a couple of things. I think for me, the biggest mistake people make about engaging an audience is they just lack an energy. It's hard work up there. Presenting up there is hard work, physically, calorie burning hard work. And most people that I see who are boring an audience are hugely lacking in energy. And the other thing is tell a good story. I work with people all the time that say, I've written a presentation. And my first response is, well, that's an oxymoron, because we don't write a presentation, we speak a presentation. And what they mean is I've sat down and I've put together what I call a random collection of facts. So here's my presentation. And we forget that as human beings, we love a good story. We love a good story. And anyone that has children, you can entertain your children for hours with a good story. And in reality, grown-ups are no different, adults are no different. And And I think telling a really good story is a key way to keep people engaged. And the final, really, I guess for me, the other sort of final element of how we engage people is be passionate about what you're talking about. You know, if you don't look and sound like you care, you have not got a hope of your audience caring. So, you know, you've got to get up there and be passionate and make it sound like this matters, because if you don't, you're going to be, you know, pushing uphill through treacle to try and get your audience to engage with what you're saying. But, you know, once we get them, I think and we understand that, it's much easier to hold that engagement.
Thank you for that, and you know, I'm really glad you brought that in, because that I was going to throw the passion word onto the table next, and the reason I was looking at that, you know, as you were talking there, is for me, passion can only come in if you believe in what you're talking about, in the story you're telling, in the picture you're painting.
Yeah.
You have to believe that. And if you don't, I think that'll come across in the presentation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so interesting. I mean, again, I go back to the bankers, you know, the people, or the finance directors or whatever, that say, oh, well, you know, this is the boring bit. And I think it's not the boring bit. And most people love it. You know, most people love their job. Now, don't get me wrong. We all have days that we think, oh, I really can't be bothered and I'm not feeling the love. But actually, what's important is, and the work that I do with people is to understand, okay, when we have those days, how do we step into that mode? How do we step, you know, I've seen actors in the wings really, really unwell and walk out on stage and you would not know that at all. It's like, it's almost as though they step into a different, you know, a different persona when they're out there. And actually, when people understand the physical sensation of what it feels like to communicate with that passion, I think it's much easier to recreate it, even if we're perhaps not feeling it. You know, another thing is people that have to say the same spiel over and over again. You know, a lot of people that work in sales, they end up having to deliver the same thing day in, day out, day in. And the first 5 times or 50 times they do it, they're quite fired up about it. And by the 500th time, you know, and I always say to people, the audience on the last night pay exactly the same for their ticket as the audience on the first night. And as actors, we have a duty to deliver a consistency of standard. And if you don't have that passion and that enthusiasm, don't be surprised when the audience start, you know, yawning and looking at their phones and chatting among themselves, because I think it's really key. I think it's absolutely key. People ask me why I call the company Redvoice. And the voice bit is obvious, it's about communication, but red for me is a colour of passion and energy and vibrancy. It's also a colour of danger and fear and warning and all those things that we experience when we feel exposed in a presenting situation, you know. So yeah, passion, absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Victoria. And just some, I just wondered if there are some common misconceptions about public speaking that perhaps you can debunk for us.
I think the big one for me is there is a difference between what you want to say and what an audience need to hear. And very often for me, people over explain, over write, over complicate. And I always say, you know, there's that brilliant Oscar Wilde quote. Actually, it's been attributed to lots of people, but I think Oscar Wilde is one of them, who said, if I had more time, I'd have written a shorter letter. And I think that sums up presenting really well. To say less and say it better is really hard. And I think that's definitely something that comes up over and over again, for sure.
Very, very good. So what is my audience wanting to hear, and how can I deliver that in a way that they're going to really be able to consume that easily?
Yeah, exactly. Because very often it's so easy to be sent off on a tangent, you know, and we find ourselves talking down an alley and we think, what am I doing down here? Actually, to always say to yourself, I might want to explain all this really complicated stuff, but what do my audience need to hear? I was talking earlier about what's my environment as being one of the questions. The first question that we ask ourselves always as presenters is, who is my audience? You know, who is in the room in front of me? And I think once we understand that, it's much easier to think, okay, what do these people need to hear, which is not the same as what do I want to say. And I think it's also a great starting point when we look at preparing a presentation. Don't start from saying, most people say, right, what do I want to say? And I always say, no, 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 what do they need to hear? What do you want them to take away? You know, I think that's really key.
Thank you. And we could probably talk for another 5 hours or so on this subject and drift into another day. But as we, unfortunately, we must come towards a close. And I just wondered, you know, there's some absolute sterling advice that you've already talked through in our discussion today, Victoria. And I just wondered if there was any other pieces of advice that you'd just like to leave our listeners with around how can they improve, and, you know, what's a good piece of advice for them to deliver in a great speech?
Very simple. Practice. Practice. You know, we have an expression. I come from a family of musicians, and from my trainer as a rider, it's something ridiculous like 10,000 hours to be an expert at something. And I'm not asking people to spend 10,000 hours on their presentation, but I am absolutely astounded at how little practicing people do of their presentation. And by practicing, I don't mean opening your slides and looking through your slides on the train. I mean standing up in a room with if you're doing a keynote, with the slides up on a screen and actually practicing. I've done pitches with organizations. They're pitching for multi-million pound contracts, and they ask me to come in and help, and I say, when's the rehearsal? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And, you know, there is absolutely no substitute for practicing, getting up there and feeling the sensation of saying those words out loud. Because I think the mistake so many people make is the first time they say those words aloud is when they have an audience in front of them. And that's why they get unstuck and suddenly look at a slide and think, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying on this slide, or talk themselves down the alley that I was talking about earlier on and end up going off piste and off on a tangent. Practice, get up and practice. You know, as professionals, whatever we're doing as professional performers, we absolutely practice. So that for me would be the best tip that I could give anyone.
Thank you very much. And as you say, David Beckham wasn't able to bend those free kicks into the top corner just by stepping up and doing it the first time.
Yeah. Have you watched the program?
I haven't yet. No, I actually have it ready. I mean,
it's fascinating because you really realise the hours and hours and hours, literally days, that he spent in the back garden with his dad, kicking a football, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. You know, and actually we say repetition builds fact. And I think that practice is so key. The more you do something, the more you solidify it and it becomes habitual. So yeah, bend it like Beckham.
Well, thank you, Victoria. You know, thank you very much for your time, your insights. Really do appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Redvoice, please do reach out to Victoria through LinkedIn or visit redvoiceuk.com. And we hope you've enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. Please make sure you do subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and be yourself.